Let's call to order the Assembly's Committee of the Whole on Homelessness. And let's begin by going around with introductions. And can we start with you, Mr. Gates?
I'm usually this assistant musical.
Melinda Freeman, the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Nancy Burke with the Mayor's Office.
John Weddleton, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn.
Bill Evans.
Forrest for Assembly. Pete Peterson. Tim Stevens.
Duke Gray.
And if we can go around the audience to learn who some of the stakeholders and other interested citizens are. Start with you, ma'am.
James Strait with United Way. Sue Brogan with United Way of Anchorage. Debbie Keller with ADM.
Greg in the Mayor's Office.
Katie Bergen, I'm with the Mayor's Office.
I'm Caitlin Collins, I'm in the Mayor's Office.
Ron Oliva, adjacent property owner to the shelter and Beans Cafe. Active citizen engaging in activities.
Yes, you are.
I'm one of the other interpreters.
Okay.
I'm Catherine. I'm interning with the therapeutic courts.
And I'm Casey Lee. I am the project coordinator for the Belmont Court and for the coordinated, which is the Coordinator Resources Project, as well as a centralized competency calendar.
Issa Aquino, Catholic Social Services.
Carmen Wenger, Director of the Anchorage Coalition Against Homelessness.
Christopher Constant, Fairview Business Association and Community Council.
Susan Usante, Integrated Housing and Services with the Division of Behavioral Health.
Beth Wilson with the Division of Behavioral Health.
Jan Jones, First Covenant Church,
Warren Jones, First Covenant Church.
Folks in the back.
I'm Sylvia, last Health Retail.
Jonah, Barbara.
Sheriff Easy and then Cindy
Renee Mill,
I'm Courtney Upland with APAC.
Maria Crouch, also with APAC.
Sharon Porter, Patrol Center.
Maggie Alder, Volunteers of America.
Josh Mulgrew.
And Amanda runs everything. Thank you all for being here. We do appreciate your participation. It means a lot. As a logistical note for the assembly members, you see that Amanda has provided us each with a notebook. Because this topic tends to be somewhat paper intensive and we have the plans for the ongoing metrics, this will be an opportunity to keep all your stuff organized and together. You can leave. Amanda's going to make efforts to three-hole punch all the documents that come in for each meeting. You can leave your notebook here and Amanda will take care of updating it, or you can take it with you and do what you want with it. But it's just mostly to help you keep everything organized. Okay, let's move on with our agenda, and we're on item number 3, homeless program areas and events to report. And with that, we'll turn over to Ms. Burton.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind if we switched our first 2 items and ask the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness to present the data for us first.
That would be fine.
And so by way of introduction, Carmen Wenger is the director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and she's with us today to talk through the long-anticipated, much-beloved point-in-time count numbers. This is the total count that happens in January, is the community's count that gets reported to HUD for funding that comes into the community for emergency services, the safety net. And I think Carmen will explain a little bit of that to us today. And also is the one of the best data points that we can use to gauge homelessness in the community and how things are going. The way that HUD presents the numbers can be a little different than we talk about it in some of the committee work or as we go about our programs. So Carmen has offered to walk us through the data today.
Good morning, and thank you for letting us come and explain some of the somewhat less than intuitive way that we report the numbers. So thank you, Nancy, for the background. As a little bit more of a background, this is a requirement for the organization that holds what's called the Continuum of Care to perform every year. It's an effort to create an unduplicated count nationwide, so it's done on the same day in every community across the country. which is the last Wednesday in January.
Are you able to hear Carmen in the back? Angela, it's a difficult room for this, so if you can yell at us a little bit.
Okay. So we complete this count every year on the last Wednesday in January, and everything reported in these numbers are according to HUD definitions, which is not always necessarily the definition that we use in other parts of the community, which is one of the sticking points that causes confusion. HUD has a very strict definitions of what homelessness means. So a lot of the things that we consider as a community, or even in other programs, such as with the school district, are not considered homeless for these purposes. The biggest ones typically are doubling up or couch surfing, which especially affects youth, and staying in hotels or motels for economic reasons, with or without assistance. So you should have 3 sheets, and hopefully they got around to the audience as well. The top sheet are for those of you who like tables, and the other 2 are for those of you who like graphs. That give you equal opportunity learner in my information. So the top sheet kind of shows the really high level numbers for the past 3 years. People do like to see trends, but I want to walk through a couple of the things that may stand out as reasons why they're not a direct comparison. We've been striving, there's been a particular effort the past several years to increase the reliability and the replicability of these numbers. However, we are subject to HUD's changes every year, as we do have to go by their rules. So one of the biggest ones you'll see, especially in the graphs, there was in early January 15th, a new chronically homeless definition took place. And so there's a large drop in those reported from 2015 to 2016. And we can't account for what of that is a definition change and what of that is a change in what we're seeing in the community. Because this count is done in January, weather is also a very large factor, both in where people are choosing to stay and where we're able to find them. For example, we know there was a major shift in those that were counted as unsheltered in 2015. So when we're comparing, 2015, if you remember, was a very mild year. However, the week of the count was the coldest week of the winter. It was very windy and very cold. So many people who spent most of the winter outdoors came into the shelter for that specific week. And so that can affect the numbers. There was a significant increase in the number of children under the age of 18 from 2014 to 2015. The Child in Transition program with the Anchorage School District started doing a more comprehensive review of the children that they were working with, and they reported numbers that hadn't been reported in the past. And the third kind of context piece, or the fourth context piece, is the evolution of how we've done outreach to find people who are unsheltered. In 2014, every other year, so the odd years are a required year to do outreach per HUD. We're only required to do it every other year. We can choose to do it additional years, such as we did this year. So 2014, there was not an organized adult outreach for those that were unsheltered. We were required by HUD to do one in 2015, and we did. And this year, as you know from the hard work of the mayor's office, we voluntarily chose to do a very comprehensive outreach because data is so important to us at this point in time. So those are just a couple of context pieces as you look through the numbers. Overall, we are seeing a trend down. Our total number is down. Some of the things that we've been very pleased to see are especially that there were no unsheltered children under the age of 18. Family homelessness has been something that has been a focus of the coalition for a long time, making sure that no family sleeps in an unsafe place in the coldest months of the year, and we're pleased to see that reflected in the data. If you look at the 2 graphs, they're the same numbers as in the chart, they're just broken down into additional categories. So on your chart, sheltered is a combination of those in emergency shelter and those in transitional housing. And they're broken out so you can see a little bit more granularity on the charts. The charts also show the total for Alaska. So the way the counts are conducted, we fall into 2 HUD jurisdictions. Anchorage is one, and the balance of state, or everything except for the municipality of Anchorage, is the other HUD jurisdiction. And that's how we report the numbers. So you can see what proportion of each of these Anchorage makes up of our total state numbers. And I know this is a lot of information to look at, but I would be happy to answer any questions you have. This is also, like Nancy said, this is one of our marks throughout the year, and so anytime you're using this data and questions come up, I'm also happy to answer them at a later point.
Could you say again, Ms.
Go ahead.
Is the green balance of state plus Anchorage or the whole state?
Yes.
Or is it just balance of state?
The green is Alaska total. So it's Anchorage plus the balance of state. So if you just look at the top number for 2016, if you just look at where the green line goes past the orange bar, that's what constitutes the balance of state.
Mr. Flynn and then Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah. Thank you for the information. Does HUD use this and how it distributes funding to local government for finding solutions to homeless issues?
Yeah, it plays into a larger formula that HUD uses for allocations of funding, and they're both some that go to local government. So the municipality here administers home, CDBG, and ESG funds, and the Anchorage Coalition administers continuum of care funds. So those readjustments are done every 2 years. They're done with the data data sets that are on the year we're required to do outreach.
And is there, statistics are fun, is there any adjustment to the raw data based on latitude, for example?
That would be great. No, there isn't. The adjustments to the data.
Any temperature, anything?
There aren't. So but the raw numbers aren't the only thing that goes into the algorithm to define the funding allocations. I wish I knew them all off the top of my head, but it includes what services are provided, numbers from this count, plus a comprehensive review of our homeless management information system. We report to Congress annually called the Annual Homeless Assessment Report, or AHAR, and how well we perform in certain categories. So to my knowledge, latitude nor weather are taken into consideration. It is something that we try to bring up at every opportunity when we talk with our representatives, and it's certainly well understood by our local field office.
Might be something, one of the easy work products for this committee is doing a resolution asking our congressional delegation to look into some adjustment to the formula. That could be, precipitation levels, could be mean temperature, could be any number of environmental factors that would affect. Probably a lot more fun to be homeless in Honolulu than it is here.
I think Honolulu's discovering that.
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Dunbar.
I volunteer to coordinate outreach with Don Young's office. I think you described how our stakeholders and our mayor's office has sort of admirably put a lot of effort to getting these numbers, and it looks from these numbers like we have a little over half the state's total of homeless here in the city, of people experiencing homelessness. But I'm curious how other parts of the state have mirrored that. Do you think other parts of the state have put that same kind of effort into the count? Do you think we're underreported or underreported from outside of Anchorage?
Really good question. So one of the things that we're working in conjunction with the state coalition on, and we've been for several years, is trying to align our methodology so it's done the same way in the entire state. One of the big shifts that we saw this year that didn't affect us as disproportionately as the balance of state was going to a new administrator of our HMIS system, and they provided of technical assistance to make sure that at least the counts that are done within a program. So I can back up and say there's three main places that we collect information. One is if somebody receives a service for the night of the count. So for example, they're in Brother Francis Shelter, they're in Clare House. The second is our outreach teams, which we've talked about and you've heard about from the mayor's office. And the third is if a community does a Project Homeless Connect event, we collect all the information we need to report at that event. And so some of our hub communities that also do Project Homeless Connects, we have additional information from. So there's one in the Kenai, there's one in Matsu, Fairbanks does one, Juneau does one. But the different communities' capacity to do outreach varies significantly. I don't believe there was outreach done in any community. I could be wrong, but when we were doing our planning, there were no plans to have anybody do outreach in any other community. So our unsheltered numbers, we certainly gather more information, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's underreported. We, most of the communities that are farther out, Bethel, Nome, Dillingham, they only provide information that is from when someone received a service that night. So this gets into kind of questions of what homelessness looks like in different communities. Urban homelessness looks very different than rural homelessness, mostly in especially the very small communities. People will, somebody will not stay unsheltered. They will be brought into a home and they'll have to be passed from house to house, but that wouldn't qualify under HUD definition anyway. So I think we do a much more comprehensive count, but what would be actually eligible to be counted for HUD definition is questionable for the rest of the state.
I guess the one little follow-up on that is, sort of, particularly with the Matsu. I remember I went a couple years ago out to my house and toured there, had a conversation with them, and was sort of shocked by how much homelessness they perceived that was there. And I'm wondering if they are in any way, in your opinion, undercounted. What is your perception of the quality of numbers you're getting out of the Matsu?
Sure. So Matsu is very well organized. The service providers out there do a fantastic job of coordinating and working together. So I think all of the service providers do a very good job of entering. And they also do a Project Homeless Connect event. So people who voluntarily chose to come to an event who may be the night of the count unsheltered would be captured there. So I think they do, of our other urban centers in the state, they do very well. They're very organized.
Thank you.
Ms. Burke and then Mr. Peterson.
You might be getting at a question that is something I believe the communities are learning, and that is how to interact with different parts of homeless populations. Even though we had 190 people, we gridded the Anchorage area in 22 grids to do our outreach count. We used our phone to track the GIS points. Feedback from the Downtown Partnership and the security group that's been meeting is that we probably missed the stairwells. And so, I think there's just a lot to learn about doing outreach, and we're articulating what we're doing. So other communities, stairwells might not be something other than maybe Juneau, Fairbanks, but sharing the information through those networks. And in particular in the Matsu, I've heard that youth population can be challenging because they're couch surfing, they're, and then we get into the fact that HUD wouldn't necessarily consider someone couch surfing as homeless. So a more useful term as for homeless as providers or community leaders doesn't meet the strict definitions. So by nature of that, we're undercounting parts of the problem. So I just think that many communities are really working on different approaches for different parts of the homeless population.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, could it be that the children are staying at Safe Harbor with their family, and that's why we had fewer out on the street? So we're just wondered where Safe Harbor might be fitting into these statistics?
That's a really good question. So Safe Harbor is considered transitional housing. So we have both a total and we have a number under 18 in transitional housing. So it's maybe 2/3 of the way down for the children's metric.
But then our cold weather shelter system would probably also account for the lack of children in those categories, in the unsheltered category as well.
All right, thank you.
See any other questions? Is there a statistical deviation on this? I mean, is it with a certain percentage applied to this analysis that we believe that this is within 5% plus or minus? Or has that been done on this data at all?
It hasn't. Part of that is, as I was saying, the challenges to the data collection. And while we do present the data from year to year, we tend to shy away from doing straight comparisons because of the variables. And so it may, one of the hard parts about statistically analyzing this is it may be a really good count for that one night, but not very representative of the next 200 days. So unfortunately, we don't have any of that. What I look for is I look for a comparison between point in time and our year-long data to kind of, I don't average them, but I look at where the significant differences are and try to figure them out and see how well they line up. So I find it when you're looking for trends or you're looking for comprehensive information, taking both of them together and digesting that is a more accurate whole picture.
And just to follow up, and this is the conversation I was having with Nancy beforehand. You know, and you may not even be the appropriate person to answer this, but I'm sort of struck by the fact that the data we see tends to show that we're doing better with homeless and the numbers are going down. But the perception, at least anecdotally, that I have, and that I've heard from a lot of other people in town, is that it's dramatically increased, at least what's visible to people as far as what they perceive to be homeless people in different places. Do you have any sense of what might be causing that?
I always prefer the service providers to answer those questions because they're the ones that are directly dealing with clients. However, when you're looking at an issue of visible homelessness, if you look at some of our chronic homelessness numbers and our unsheltered numbers, those are the people that are visible to our community. Most of the rest of the people experiencing homelessness are not something that people interact with on a daily basis, and they don't see it and they don't necessarily think about it unless it's an issue that's important to them. So if you look at the chronic homeless numbers kind of 3/4 of the way down the page on the graphs, or any of the unsheltered numbers which are sprinkled in, but you can see on the table, they make up a really small percentage of the rest. Usually, and we do have kind of long-term information on this, and nationally it's about 18% are in a chronic homeless, unsheltered state. And over time, we've actually been remarkably consistent. We've been between 16 and 20% as a community over a really long period of time. Again, all the caveats to the data that could be off, but that one is pretty consistent.
I would just say at Brother Francis Shelter, between 2005 and 2015, the number of people we serve in a year has gone up by 30%. So just to say, there's different ways to look at this. It's like we're all looking at the elephant from different pieces, and I think we've come a long way with the point in time count numbers, and we can say that.
Mr. Trainee, do you know if we have the rescue mission numbers in there too? A lot of people state the rescue missions. Are those numbers factored into this?
We get, they do a paper count, so there's two ways that providers can submit data for the point in time count. If they use the homeless management information system, the information is automatically pulled over into the numbers we use. And we reach out to all the other service providers to fill out a paper form to count the people that they served that evening, and they do participate in a paper count.
So the numbers are counted in
Yes, they
there?
are.
Thank you.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This kind of goes off, I think, of Bill's question here. It might be that different citizens are seeing people who are experiencing homelessness more because they are living now in different parts of the city. And so I'm wondering if you are, and perhaps this is too detailed or too sort of big brother, but could you provide us with a map of sort of where people tended to be found, and could we do that over to, like, if we go back to 2015, 2016, we could see sort of where they shifted to and from?
It's not something we currently collect. The service providers that do outreach provide us with a lot of good anecdotal information. We've not done any mapping. That was actually something that was brought up at our data committee meeting yesterday of looking at it that way. My short answer to you is the coalition does not have any information to provide. The long answer is looking into some of the work of the mayor's office, some work of those at the university. It can be done, and they're talking about how to do it. There's additional considerations that would have to be taken into account as to who owned the data, where that went for safety considerations, both of public looking at it and residents.
Mr. Train?
Mr. Chairman, are they gonna have the map available tonight for us that we got last night that shows the homeless camps? And those that are currently in operation, those that have been eliminated?
Are they gonna have it available at this meeting?
Yeah, I wonder. You do have it, okay?
Yes.
Because that's part of what he's talking about. The public perceives the camps and the homelessness must be running rampant. In reality, that may not be the case.
Yes, that's a later agenda.
We got a map last night, you want to look at it.
We're just not there yet, we're headed.
We can bump it up if you want.
Mr. Constant?
You mentioned that the data is different from, reported differently than how you might define or how the city or state. So under the chronic homeless, is that definition square with what you guys identify as chronic homeless?
So the major change, so the definition change that took place January 15th, if you can hear his question, Chris asked if the chronic homeless definition was in line with how we perceive chronic homelessness. The change that took place most recently, the definition had previously been 1 year of continuous homelessness, or 4 episodes in 3 years of any duration. And the change that took effect January 15th was that the 4 or more episodes of homelessness in 3 years had to add up to 1 year of homelessness. And I think the biggest challenge with that is documentation. When somebody has experienced 4 episodes of homelessness, trying to have appropriate documentation to prove the number of days that those episodes added up to is very difficult, especially because people, they don't have a way of maintaining records of hearing that what them are necessarily remembering. They don't pull up their iPhone and check the number of days they might present themselves being homeless. So that has been our biggest challenge with the new definition.
So just one very brief follow-up, then does that essentially at least allude to the fact that maybe having a lower number because some people just are no longer being counted as they were before?
If you look, if you compare the 2015 data to the 2016 data, we absolutely believe that it's a change in definition. It's entirely possible that there was also a change in people experiencing it, but we can't determine that from the data.
Mr. Peters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I believe in one of our previous meetings over the last couple of years, we were informed that some people have seasonal employment and they prefer to camp out in the summertime and try to put some cash away so that they can get an apartment or someplace to live indoors during the winter. And so that, I suppose, could have an effect on the numbers that are counted in the wintertime, and then you see more people camping out in the spring and summer.
Yes.
Seeing no other, Mr. Leva, really quickly?
Yes, with Senate Bill 91, and the release of prisoners, I'm finding a lot of Baker boxes on my property because I know they're going straight to that 30% increase at the Brother Francis shelter. These are homeless releasees from 6th Avenue and Cook Inlet Creek Drive. Have you addressed that projected increase in population as unsheltered homeless because they have no jobs and they have no place to go?
We haven't, we don't do projections on point in time numbers, so we only, it's a retroactive count, so it's done on the last day of January. We don't project to what we believe the next year will be. If they're in shelter, they're in Brother Francis shelter, they're not counted as unsheltered because they fall under the emergency shelter category of the sheltered homeless count. And we are, the coalition has a very close working relationship with the Reentry Coalition's Housing Subcommittee, and we work with them on their efforts to not allow any re-entrant to have an home.
Thank you. I think that wraps up that category. We can move on to the next. First, I have three announcements. One, if there are not enough seats in the back or anywhere else, there are plenty of seats here. I feel a bit lonely anyway. We appreciate the company if anybody wants to sit up here. Second, and these two are unrelated, the pizza has arrived, and at some appropriate point, we'll have a short 5-minute break. You can help yourself to some pizza. Until then, you just have to smell it. And third, Ms. Gray Jackson is not here, the chair of the assembly. She just wanted to let you know she would be here otherwise, but she's back on the East Coast. Thanks. We'll move on.
So next on the agenda, we will provide an update on one of the subpopulations that's represented in the data, but a topic of discussion, and that's veteran homelessness. So Steve Ashman is our lead from the Department of Health and Human Services, and can give us, he's been leading this group for quite some time now, so he can give us that update.
Thank you, through the chair. Last year, as part of the Mayor's Pledge to End Veterans Homelessness, we looked at the 2015 point in time information. We didn't receive that information until about May, once it's been processed and the data was clean. And from that information, we put together a task work group that met weekly. That group consisted of representatives from the Veterans Administration, of course representatives from Health and Human Services, representatives from Veterans Administration, Anchorage Community Mental Health, Rural CAP, and Brother Francis Shelter. And we met week by week and put together a by name list. I mean, when we started out, all we had was AKHMIS, a management information system number for an individual. And until we got releases so that we could share the information, we went off numbers. However, a lot of people, with that number, the number crosses on a lot of different agencies. But weekly we met, and finally we got it down to a by name list. We started out with 29 unsheltered veterans, 29 unsheltered veterans, 22 unsheltered veterans last year in May when we started this. And when we hit Veterans Day through these activities, we had no unsheltered veterans from that original point in time. That didn't mean that there were new unsheltered veterans that didn't come up, and that we didn't work with those individuals also, but we were focusing on the point in time information. And the way we ran those weekly meetings was we ensured that there was follow-up. The question was, who's seen John? Who knows where John's at? Who's the last one to see him? Go out and since you were the last one to see him, you go out and if you think he's over at this camp, you go find John and report to us next week on what the outcome of it was. So we were assigning tasks to one another to really go out and engage with these individuals. It was very successful. We went through the 22 individuals. And out of those 22 individuals, one of the individuals died. 10 individuals were removed from the homeless list altogether and were housed. And the other 12 were in emergency shelters, so they were housed. 7 were actively working with case managers. 3 of them weren't veterans, it's self-reported, but those 3 were still working with case managers, and 2 refused to work with any case manager whatsoever, but they were housed. So we effectively removed those folks from the camps and into emergency shelters. We are going to implement this as part of the mayor's weekly work group by name list. We're going to implement the same process, probably, quite frankly, a little bit more sophisticated than what we did, but we're going to implement that this year and have been doing that, and including the veterans as well as anybody in camp that we identified during point in time. I know that Carmen says we don't compare point in time years from point in time years, but I'm going to compare point in time years from 15 to 16 from the veterans standpoint. Total veterans that would be emergency transitional and unsheltered in 2015 were 130. Total veterans that's emergency transitional or unsheltered in 2015 were 87 individuals. When we look at the unsheltered veterans at point in time, last year there were 29, and last year there were 22, and this year there are 29. So we will be going and searching for those veterans. And fortunately, one of the reasons we had success with the veterans is the Veterans Administration had some special tools available. Those are those special VASH veteran vouchers dedicated to veterans. As those are fully subscribed or leased up, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but it was, we were able to offer housing immediately through those VASH vouchers. This year, it will be a little tougher because there's not as many vouchers out there, or people are on vouchers, but the municipality through its home program, federal home program, is going to be allocating $225,000 for temporary vouchers until somebody can get on the voucher. So we'll be able, the key is to be, once you engage that individual, to be able to offer them housing as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we're just failing them. So we've got to be able to offer them.
Does VA assist in identifying, or do we communicate with VA in terms of those numbers? If somebody, if a veteran showed up for services at VA but wasn't housed somewhere, would VA track that, or would VA do something about that?
The VA was a wonderful partner, and they had at least one, probably 2 or 3 staff at every weekly meeting that we had. If it turns out that an individual was not a veteran, we would still make that connection with the appropriate service provider and try to find that individual, help and engage them in services. They were at the table every meeting.
Do they provide vouchers for the veterans, or?
The Veterans Administration, actually it's through Alaska Housing Finance Corporation that administers, but it's a special allocation specifically for veterans. And now Cook Inlet Housing Authority received an allocation, I think 25 or 30 VASH vouchers.
Yeah, it'd be nice to identify some partners like that, maybe the Native Hospital or those types of services. It's a good model.
Mr. Steele is one of our sheltered veterans. Another sheltered veteran, Mr. Trainee.
How do we define a veteran? We talked about somebody that just gets out of the military and doesn't have any housing. Or is this somebody that got out of the military 20 or 30 years ago, and they're not really, they're a veteran, but not in the literal sense of just getting out of the military? How do we define one?
The VA will define military, and I don't know if we have anybody in here, but it had to be other dishonorable discharge from
Under
active.
214.
That's right, 8214, and they, of course, the VA can find out immediately. But discharge from active duty with a favorable discharge, and it doesn't count National Guard or reservists.
They won't go to NGB Form 22 even though people qualify for VA benefits.
Not unless,
active duty over 180 days.
and that's where we need the VA at the table, because it had to do whether or not they work. I believe, and maybe we have a member here that might know more than I do, but they would have had to serve in an act of war, in a conflict, or something like that. But it's pretty complex.
No, actually, they don't have to. All they have to have is 180 days on active duty.
Okay, that's why I want the
They should
VA.
run part of the program.
We run everybody through the VA, and you'd be surprised. We did have other veterans, but they're all self-identified, and the question wasn't asked correctly. Are you a veteran of the United States military? And, are you a veteran was the wrong answer, because some veterans that self-identified were from other countries. So everybody ran through the VA to confirm their eligibility.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do they separate them out in categories as Vietnam vet, veteran of Afghanistan or whatever?
No. All the veterans are treated. Any veteran that's eligible, is an eligible veteran, will be an eligible veteran for the VA program.
Okay, thanks.
Questions on the veterans?
I guess I have a quick question. Is that at the end of your presentation?
Yes.
So I would like to hear sort of what additional plans you have going forward. So we have 29 unsheltered veterans. What do you think the prospects are to get down to 0? What, if anything, can we do to help you with that?
I think I'll let Nancy talk about how we may be able to help, but we're going to run the program. It will be part of our weekly homeless project. I think one thing I failed to mention is that one of the things that we did receive is we received weekly updates from the management information system to look at the status of all of those veterans, which guided us to see who was falling off the list and where we go. I think, I'm pleased with the Assembly in approving that $425,000 that will assist with outreach and engagement and some other activities that we have that will benefit not only veterans but all homeless individuals. Housing, permanent supportive housing will always be an issue. These folks without a rental subsidy, along with the appropriate supports and subsidies and mental health services, should they desire to utilize those. Without that, it can't be successful. But housing stock is probably the biggest barrier that we have.
Seeing no other questions, we can move on. But first, we will take a 5-minute break, and I literally mean 5 minutes. I will gavel in 5 minutes from now. If you want to help yourself to some pizza, please do. 5 minutes. Okay. 5 minutes is up. If you didn't get a chance to get the pizza, there'll be probably some left over again. Be sure to help yourself. With that, let's move on to the next category on our agenda, and it's the follow-up from our prior meeting. And with that, again, I'll turn it over to Ms. Burke.
Trying to eat quickly. So I think the remaining items were either follow-up from our last meeting or follow-up from other connected meetings. And so I'll just provide some verbal updates, and then we can handle it with questions. So the first update is the follow-up to the Joint Assembly Public Safety and Homelessness meeting. And I think the work that we're doing on the community portal around a portion of the total homeless population are those visible folks that we talked about. And so the administration, the mayor's been directing us to do some work around bringing together all of those departments that work on camps and reports of people out in the community. And what's frustrating, we had a meeting last night with some of the community council members who live along the waterway where the trails are, who are very frustrated because it has a direct impact on their backyards and people using those areas. And the frustration that's been expressed to us is mirrored by the people who are staff, in that the calls and the information are coming in to several different points in the municipality. So Parks and Recreation gets calls. APD's non-emergency number is the place that we encourage citizens to call. Those calls get run through the CAP team. Their schedule is a little different than the hours of other businesses, they work evenings, they don't work Mondays, so there's several points where the process needs clarification, and so that's the work that the mayor directed us to do. And in reviewing how that might happen more efficiently, the municipalities adopted a system that prioritizes and directs constituent calls on any number of topics. It's called Hanson. So there will be a portal that citizens now can use. It will start on the website and it will go to an app fairly quickly after that will allow them to report a camp into the data system, and will also allow them to uplink photos of the camp site, because one of the problems we have is a citizen calls in a camp and it's near the bridge on Chester Creek, about 5 paces beyond the tree on the left, and it's a blue tent, and so you can see how it's just really hard to follow up on specifics of those contexts. So now if a citizen is out, they see a camp, they want to report it, they can take a photo of it and uplink it into the system, and if their photo is GIS enabled, which we hope that people with smartphones will do this for us, that will get the coordinates off of that picture. And so the map that I'm going to hand around is, Amanda tells me that we can fold these and put them in the front pocket of the binders. This is the map that Assemblymember Trainee referred to. This is the site that Parks and Recs, these are all the sites with some color coding. Currently, Parks and Rec administers the resources to do the camp cleanup, and they are not very robust at the moment. It's a community workforce crew that has other responsibilities in addition to camp cleanup, although now that we're really focused on this, community workforce is exclusively doing camp cleanup. But you can see there are about 65 campsites that are located. These are just the ones that have been reported that Parks and Rec is aware of. And across the bowl, and in the color coding, you can see that there are some that have been already cleaned, and so that's marked on the map. There's some that are frequent sites, and then there are occasional cleanup zones. But you can see the distribution around the community is quite broad. So there are camps everywhere. And now with citizens thinking more about the homeless initiative, thinking more and maybe even seeing more people on the street, they're thinking about it. So I think this, not only the perception, but the reality that there are a lot of camps across the bowl is with us. So the mayor has directed us to provide a system that provides communication back to the citizens who are reporting camps to us about what's happening. We're creating a frequently asked questions and a narrative description, or even like a visual description of that process that I've just outlined for you, but also including the timelines that are associated with it. And one of the important information points I want to provide to citizens is that this cleanup really has not happened for the last 3 or 4 years, at least. So we've been aware of camps, we've addressed them as we're able to in the summertime, but we really have not deployed resources adequate to really doing a cleanup across the community. But that is the push for this summer. And so once the report comes into the portal, now our APD officers, the CAP team, and just a quick shout out to Josh Nolder, who's hiding in the back over there. He's our lead. This is the man who gets these reports, and then he assigns them out to his team to go and provide notice to the camps. So there are some timeframes that we want to establish as baselines for how long that happens. You know, the CAP team is an integral part of our police force. They get called on other calls, so they're prioritizing as they're able to, although they are out every week in the camps and providing these notices. So once it goes from the CAP team's work, there's the 15-day wait period that we've discussed, the legal period that the persons have to remove their belongings from the illegal campsite. after that 15-day period, our new Hanson portal will allow the CAP team to assign this over to Parks and Rec. So it'll now just be an internal, it'll be some toggles within the database system, and Parks and Rec will be able to place that camp on a list for cleanup. Now, this is where I think we have to really work with the community on how we prioritize the first wave of cleanup. Although the cleanup will be consistent across the summer, it probably won't happen on day 16 for every camp, because the camps, many of them are very extensive. It will take a long time to do a couple years of cleanup work probably at each site. And so this is going to be an ongoing sort of conversation with the community throughout the summer. But I would like to provide updates to this committee on what those timelines are looking like, how we're doing with those. And then once Parks and Rec is able to bring on the new 10-member crew, they'll be dedicated toward that. And I'm really hopeful that we'll see some positive movement. I think from our meeting with the community council last night that citizens are aware, they understand that this is a big job, and that we'll have really great partners with the community council, providing that we give them feedback and information. That's what they're really wanting. They want us to give them the updates, and I don't feel they're being outrageous. They just want to know what's happening. So that is the work that's happening around the camp part of the issues.
Excuse me, from feedback that I've heard from the community council, is that there are a number of places where the community wants some action done, but it may not be the municipality's property, it may be maybe school district property. There's some stairs right there on North Star Elementary School back side that goes down to the lowlands down towards the Chester Creek, and they're looking for some solutions to the problem, because people are doing some long-term camping in that area. It's where the kids use. Obviously, they're out at the moment, but kids use it during the school year to get from the neighborhood up to the school. So that's one particular issue, and I'm sure there are many like that where there are other property owners. It's not municipal property necessarily. It's being used. So I'm hoping we're able to get to that some way through the feedback. I don't know if the school district's been involved in this effort.
That's a really great connection. Thank you for that. I've been to the camp that's by Tionic Elementary, and sounds like a similar situation. But we have not connected with the school district, so that's a really great suggestion.
Yeah, I think that particular camp that the community council is concerned about came up at our meeting last night with the perception that this camp had been there a long time, people have complained a long time.
And it comes and goes. I mean, they basically, in inclement weather, they want to sleep underneath that canopy of that walkway. And so, and it's not just the kids, it's also the neighborhood uses that too.
And I believe Acting Lieutenant Holder, Captain indicated that particular camp has actually been abated 3 times already by the CAP team and removed, and people come back and start it up again. It may be perceived that it's always there, but there has been action taken at that location. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we treat all public space the same, regardless of what government agency owns it. Sometimes we have to get if it's a federal agency or that, we have to get a hold of them. But the real distinction is private versus public, not necessarily whose public property it is.
This one, they were talking about, one of the fixes they wanted was to take the canopy down. I'm not so much in favor of that, because in the wintertime, it gets snow on it, and if kids are walking that, and you got ice problem.
Every time somebody slides down there,
Yeah.
it's hurt, we're gonna.
But, the fix has got to be a fix that works, not a fix that just.
Right, where we typically go is where people can hide. So if it's and we go there repeatedly, so we'll go and we'll abate it, and then we'll wind up coming back when somebody reports a new camp. And new campers in that spot, because we then move those folks from another place, and it's this kind of rotation. So we really have to have someplace, we have to have the process in place to have them go someplace else, hopefully with the help and resources that are coming.
Down the road there, right next to C Street and Chester Creek, there's a mix of public and private property, and so I'm sure that's another difficult situation.
Public and private prevents, or it creates a problem for us. Private can be immediately trespassed. If a private property owner calls the police department, a patrol officer can come out and immediately trespass that person. If they refuse to leave, they can be given a citation for trespass, which is ultimately an arrest. However, those oftentimes get reported to us, and based on the time lag that Ms. Burke explained, it comes through various sources and eventually filters down to us. That private property owner might be waiting for weeks for the CAT team to come out, but a private property owner has a lot more rights than a public entity does to get people off the property.
Sometimes it's an itinerant property owner as well. They may not live in the area or even in the state at this point. So that may or may not be.
And that's kind of the special concern that comes up. We have dealt with dozens of property owners that don't care about what's going on those property, where they're in various forms of foreclosure, who owns the property is in question. We've even dealt with Walmart, who, I won't disclose the property, but has owned a piece of property for a very long time in Anchorage that's not developed. And I think at some point there would be a Walmart there, but at this point they have no plans to do that. And so getting a hold of a company like Walmart, and not locally, but someplace back in, I think it was Arkansas, to get the appropriate approvals to be able to go in there and clear somebody from private property becomes a special issue. And we've been able to do it, but it's not quick.
One more. The mitigation also sometimes can be a problem. Along the trail, mitigation maybe to raise the canopy a bit, or get visibility in there. But then the private property owner on the other side doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to cut it back. So anyway.
You're exactly right. If there's places to hide, folks are going to wind up going.
So, Sergeant, sorry, it's Captain?
It's Sergeant and Acting
Oh,
Lieutenant.
Acting Lieutenant, yeah, I apologize. So you had mentioned about the federal government occasionally. Pete and I were at a Basher, Stuckey Heights Community Council meeting last week, and there was a woman there who claimed that there were camps on J-Bear property, and you can see there's a pretty clean line here. There's nothing in J-Bear according to this map. And I told her I suspect that J-Bear is fairly intolerant to people camping on their land. But are you ever called on the J-Bear property? Do you work with J-Bear at all? Has that been the case, or is she mistaken about where that land, or perhaps who actually owns that land?
So a couple things. That map was produced by Parks and Recs. So if there was a homeless problem on J-Bear property, Parks and Recs wouldn't know about it. They wouldn't be called up to address it. I do believe that they are extremely aggressive at taking care of it. I mean, it's a national security issue, so I have no doubt, and I've never personally seen the CAP team be informed of a homeless camp on military property. I have to believe that they're taking care of that in their own. Now, I have been, as a patrol officer for 12 years, I have gone to plenty of times where J-Bear has called in a trespasser on their property, and sometimes those folks will have been homeless folks that have winded their way through a broken portion of the fence. That's taken care of immediately between the military folks and Anchorage Place.
So I think I would probably honestly go to, if everyone asks that question again, and say that it's our belief that the homeless camps are cleared out very quickly at J-Bear.
Yeah, I would not. I'd be very surprised that they could establish a camp on military property.
Mr. Vice Warden Weddleton.
Can I speak real briefly on that point, Mr. Chairman? Just, Mr. Dunbar, I think it was 2 summers ago, J-Bear was having enough Ursine activity that the MPs were restricted to dealing with the cantonment areas, and therefore the range actually shut down because they didn't have the personnel to get out and clear civilians who were trespassing. So I can see certain periods of time where you might have a camp for a week or 2 at least, while they deal with keeping the non-coms safe.
Fire may keep them down too.
What's that?
I said live fire may keep them down too.
Yeah, well, they try not to kill civilians, but
Mr. Welton.
There's a crimeless nirvana south of this map called Girdwood, and they have three homeless people living on the creek, and it's got the whole community astir. How would Girdwood deal with this? Because they don't have APD and different parts of that. Do you count them at all? There's only three. In that community, it's a big deal.
Yes, I would have to think about that. I mean, I think we would probably handle it through engaging them with social services and seeing what their story is and helping.
Who do they call? Because they can't call APD. And what happens if someone from Girdwood says, hey, we got these guys camping on the ground?
They could put it into the portal now.
For another 3 weeks, they set up the troopers.
I imagine it would depend upon how long and how vigorously somebody complained as to whether or not we would wind up going out there. Because I've been out there many a time, not for the CAP team, but I would, because it still is within the municipality of Anchorage, I believe if somebody did complain prior to the voter initiative going through, we would eventually go out there. I do think that a smaller community like Girdwood affords some advantages. If you've got 3 folks, you do have the ability to outreach to them much more effectively because you probably have more people willing to outreach to them than you have people camping there. And so your success rate would obviously go up.
Before.
Mr. Constant.
Just a quick note, just a cursory review of the map puts just under half of all of the camps that have been identified in downtown District 1, and then a distribution of all the rest of them across all the other districts, save for Girdwood and Eagle River, which are included. And so this is another nice piece of evidence that points to the fact that there's a disparate impact in the downtown for the homeless issue relative to where they're camped, where they're concentrated, and all these. So I just want to point that out.
It's true, and I did want to point out the fact that Mr. Rada was at our meeting last night, indicated this map is certainly far from exhausted. Those of us on the hillside realize that there are no dots for the camps we know of on the hillside as well. So it is very, and also the dots on this map don't represent a specific camp. They represent an area where camps have been sited. So you could have multiple camps at each dot. Matter of fact, if I understand it correctly, the fire that occurred this past weekend, I think they said it looks like it wiped out 8 camps. So they're pretty good groupings. Mr. Oliva.
Yes, the ACLU caused the 15-day waiting period, and I suggested that you immediately go in and appraise the camps, because if it's abandoned, is it worth less than $100, and then have an inventory, important papers, something that may be a piece of art, worth more than $25, and then that could be stored. Because by leaving those camps for 15 days, it creates a health hazard of bed bugs, lice, maggots, tracks bears, and then when another camper takes that stuff out, they're being exposed to that health hazard. Plus the fecal material dries out, it becomes porous, and you're looking at MRSA and other health considerations. I am in the process of challenging that 15-day timeline on the basis of health and safety. And we should work with the ACLU, still respecting if it's a home, a campsite. Why weren't they there and remove it in 48 hours? Did they go on vacation? Why 15 days? It's a threat to all of us by leaving it there 15 days.
Understood, Mr. Oliva, and cannot argue with your inexhaustible logic on the cost-benefit analysis of that. I know Mr. Trainey has already contacted the ACLU about reducing that 15-day limit. And you were at the meeting last week. Do you understand that there are issues that go beyond the time limit that go into storage of this material, recognizing that a lot of it's just biohazard that can be reduced, but there are a number of issues that go to how quickly we can eradicate the camps, even beyond what the ACLU is requesting, as far as our resources, our logistics. And just going on to that point, I do want to make sure and give a shout out, or actually a round of applause, wouldn't be bad, for the CAP team. We've had a number of these meetings recently on the homeless camps, and Acting Lieutenant Older has been graciously there at every one of them, providing this information. And because his unit, which is just literally a handful of men and women, is the point at which all of this kind of boils down to eradicate the camps, a lot of the heat and a lot of the pressure tends to go to, why aren't they out here doing this? Why aren't they doing that? Fact is, they're dealing with a very difficult situation. Like Mr. Viva said, flesh-eating bacteria in these camps. It's not a pretty job. So we do appreciate the work they're doing. This administration is working hard to get them more manpower, and that's already in the works. But we do appreciate the efforts of the CAP team. So because otherwise they just get bitched at these meetings. So it's good to turn around. With that, why don't we move on to the next topic?
Sure. So I tend to break the conversation into their procedures and processes around the camps and the belongings, and then there are the things we're doing with the people. And so the update on the initiative, I have a written update for the members that you can digest, and feel free to contact and ask questions regarding, there's a lot of content there. But just some of the updates around topics that we've been covering today. The initiative is looking towards a long-term solution, and it's a challenge to think of how much energy and time and resources to put into the temporary things versus the long-term solutions that we know work. And getting people to housing is the solution. And so trying to keep focused on that end goal. As you know, as we've talked about the initiative's really simple formula is, identifying the units, knowing where our stock is, having those units available for the people at the right level of service and the right level of their need, and then making sure that those social services flow into those housing settings in a way that can help those members be sustainable in the units and be stable. So, and we've talked about the outcomes of the housing programs that we've done with 80% retention in, long-term homeless people remaining in the same unit for 80% of those people remaining in the same unit for now going on 3 and 4 years for some of these programs. So really the work is just figuring out all the pieces that need to come together to do this for the remaining members in the community. And I think the point that we made about the more visible nature of homelessness, our theory is that the CAP team has been very regularly noticing camps. They're out every week. They're informing people they have to move, helping direct them to services down at the Beans Cafe and Brother Francis shelter areas. And I think that's what it is. They're not in camps. There's people who are now, we see the homeless amongst us. And I think it's providing some motivation for everyone to maintain focused on this solution. So in order to really examine the connection of people and the services, we have that Tuesday meeting that we've talked about. We meet every Tuesday. We're now able to go through the list of people that we've conducted the vulnerability index on. We have new referrals coming in. Sergeant Nolder brings the HART forms. Within the lawsuit, we're required to fill out a demographic form asking if the people would like to be contacted for social services. We bring those into the Tuesday meeting. Steve Ashman is having his members, some of the people from the Aging and Disability Resource Center, go to the library, because we know that's another place where homeless, maybe different parts of homeless than the adult population that I've been speaking to most frequently. We'll bring those referrals for the adults into that Tuesday team. So it's really a collective and coordinated entry is what we've been helping Carmen and the coalition build out for the community. We started with the adults because that was our push to really address the impacts that adult homelessness is having for the community. but then we'll be able to take what we've learned in the adult area, expand that out for coordinated entry for families, coordinated entry for youth. We'll be able to do this across our populations, and as we heard from Steve Ashman, it works. That's the good news. So you track the people, you track the housing, and you help the people get to the housing. There are some pieces that we called for in the initial part of the mayor's plan around helping with that transition. So there will be a transition coordinator that will work as part of this coordinated entry with the coalition. That position is in the works. We're getting ready to look for that person to fill that position. But if you heard in the introductions, there are a couple of people who introduced themselves from the mayor's office, and those are our partners and consultants who are working with the United Way. And Greg Newman has been on helping us sort of flesh out the initiative and figure out where the next steps are. And now Andy Mergens is on with us, and he is the landlord liaison. So that's our next piece, is to go out and start really looking for those units and identifying where in the community people may reside. So those are some of the updates from the initiative in addition to the written materials. And then last, I'll make sure to save a few minutes for the conversation. The last piece is just an update on the funding that was approved. It's sort of being lumped into a general category of the summer initiative because we're trying to get resources out to address these issues that we've been talking about. We're increasing the outreach to camps. Rural Cap has been a longtime partner of ours on that effort. They know the camps, they know the people, so we'll be turning to them to help us with that. We'll be working with Covenant House on some engagement strategies for some of the younger folks that we're seeing on the street, and they're going to help us figure out how to engage and move those folks into services this summer. Catholic Social Services, Beans Cafe, and the downtown service providers are going to use some of the funding to beef up the daytime services and to act as really a resource center for other nonprofits to come in and to house services where we can easily connect people to those services in one location. Catholic Social Services will also be beefing up their staffing for the shelter because we're asking campers to go to shelter to connect to those resources and then out to housing. And then the idea of using a van to support people in having daily activities, which could include some cleanup and work activities, and people could be a part of this camp cleanup once Parks and Rec is able to triage campsites to make sure that there's, it would be safe for other folks to come in and help clean up.
Mr. Train?
You brought up the van issue. Are we going to then drop the people off the homeless camps? Or where are they going to be dropped off at? Because I'm getting calls, emails from
Yes,
people that said,
yes.
what do you mean the mayor's going to think about downtown, give them money, and then take them back to homeless camps with the money so they can buy booze? So where are you going to drop them off at?
We're trying
On a
to
religious
do.
place or where?
No, the model that worked, and I'm actually placing a call to Albuquerque so that I can ask them some of these
We're
questions.
going to take them to Albuquerque?
And yeah, that's we'll take it down. The other question that's come up is, are you going to pay cash? And so, these are all really great questions to work out with the service provider that we partner with on this. That hasn't actually been decided or settled. But what the model is that if a person is participating in this activity, that they then have someplace to go, so that we identify a housing option for them, so that they're not returning to camp. With the idea that having something to do, building those work routines, leads to permanent employment.
So I can tell my constituents then they're not being taken back to the camp.
Yes, please
Take
do.
it.
And at a minimum, if we can't identify those housing options, we may ask them to stay at shelter so that we can really find them and engage them, with the idea that it would, be a temporary thing if we can move them out.
Thank you. I always think you were Chugach, great place today. They have no homeless there.
To where? Oh, Girdwood?
Another place.
Oh, Eagle River.
No policemen.
That'll make it
Right.
dispatch. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I was just wondering, there's a move to try to reduce the Department of Corrections number of personnel in terms of incarcerated. Hopefully not without support. And so the question is, have we factored them into this homeless issue? Or are we am I getting cart before the horse, so to speak?
No, you're right on track, and I believe that this summer is the time, well, really, we're a little behind the game already, but connecting up with, there is an entire coalition, though, a reentry coalition that is formed, and with Partners Reentry. One of the things you'll notice on the agenda is I'm going to try to present some of the other homeless population areas for the committee outside of the piece that I'm working most actively in with the adults, so that we become educated on what those other efforts are. But that group is focused on, SB 91, the outcomes, and how to assist those members in reentering the community.
If I may, the mayor's van is maybe able to help with transportation. Those folks, if they get housing through this program,
Sure.
Then they still may need transportation to get to and from services. So there may be an opportunity for some coordination.
Mr. Trainee, then Sylvia.
Mr. Chairman, SB 91, does that include any money for long-term care of these people they want to release? Or is it going to be one of these things where the state says, we've solved the problem with release, the amount of prisoners we have, but there's no follow-up money for local cities to take care of the needs of these people? Do you have any idea?
I have not been tracking. I don't even really know if there was an appropriation that went with it. But that could be, we can have that be the next topic for the next committee meeting.
I
Ask
appreciate it
some
if
of
you
those
would,
folks
if
to-
you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, because
That's great.
that's a concern I hear from a lot of people. If SB 91 goes through, if there's no follow-up, if there's no care or concern for the people they're released.
I can't imagine they would do that.
Yeah, right. How many days are they over with now?
But
They make us look good.
just before, there's no blanket release program in SB 21. Or SB 91. They're gonna allow some people to apply for parole. And that's gonna be
If there's no long-term coverage for taking care of their needs.
I know. But SB 91 isn't like California where they're just gonna release thousands of people. That's not what they're planning to do.
Can you trust you enough?
Sounds
So
like
really,
a great topic.
one second, really quick. Sylvia, did you have something? You seem very eager to.
Since 1999, ARPA has been doing what you're talking about. We hire, what's worked for us is we hire the homeless right from the shelter at minimum wage, and we take them out to move the camps. Then we drop them back off at the shelter. So that's where they congregate, that's where they come back to. So it surprises me that we have to go out of the state to get solutions when we have groups in our community who's actually been doing this since 1999. So our rest here, yes, we're going through some budget shortages because of what's happening with the community, yes. And we have one staff member, yes, which is Jonah, and he's the one that does it all. But the other challenge that we also have is that the community service, you have to supervise them. When you hire them from the homeless shelters, you don't have to supervise. So he can actually go and say, clean this area, you two clean this area, I'll be back with pizza and water in an hour and get you guys back to where you need to go. With the community service, he has to be with them, whether it's 5, whether it's 4, whether it's 10. They can only clean up one area and then get everybody back on the van and then go to the next, versus, multitasking with the group. So our price here, I was not going anywhere, guys.
But I suspect Ms. Burke and the administration will want to learn lessons that you learned in doing that job as they go through putting together the program. We only have sort of very little time left, Mr. Trainee.
No, sir.
Now, Ron, very quickly.
Real quickly, I donated that van to Barlow, and it works. And I have 134 W-2s a year from the homeless. So, okay, they don't stick with you, but I still treat them as employees. The biggest concern I have is the allocation of funds. That if they're going to go back to Beans and the Brother Francis, They are in drastic need of a full-time security guard. Not a volunteer, not a monitor. You need full-time security from a private security agency. Second thing is you need a medic. Those calls that they make to 911 put us all at risk because Station 1, Airport Heights, hey, man down, forget that. The little girl who fell out of the window has to wait. That's wrong. They have the funds to provide a medic. The third thing is commercial garbage pickup. Forget the volunteers, that doesn't work, that's just a Band-Aid. Make sure they provide commercial garbage pickup, not only for their site, but everything in their conditional use. If this was a bar, they would be required to have multiple security guards. If the bottle showed up, hey, they'd have commercial pickup. Mr. Wellington and Mr. Flynn over there, they're the guys who know about putting conditional uses on bars, the number of calls, hold their license. In this case, the nonprofits have the money, hold them accountable.
Thanks, Ron. Ms. Peterson, finally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we didn't hear any information about how many people were still being dropped off at the sleep-off center. Maybe that's something we could try to get together for the next meeting.
Good. We, and I'm sure, you know, as the administration's plan on the job issue gets more meat on the bones, we'll be getting updates on that. We ran a bit long, so I'm just gonna wrap this up. There is a statement of mission for this. Since this is our second meeting, we should have some idea why we're doing this. There's a draft statement of mission in your packets. Please take a look at that. If you have any comments, suggestions, feel free to email me about any changes. And hopefully at our next meeting, we can just adopt that as amended. We don't really have officially any time for audience participation, but I'm sure the folks here would be glad to, for the most part, to stick around in case you have any questions or anything. With that, we are adjourned to our next meeting. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, and Amanda desperately wants you to, if you were here and would like to be on our email list, we compete with the other committees to have the longest email list. It's very important to us. Please give Amanda your information and she'll make sure you get notified of our upcoming meeting. Thank you.